Hello everyone and welcome to this specially recorded coffee time talk all about the Isca Photographic Collection. So my name is Kitty Vega and I've been Isca Photographic Collection's project officer for the last 12 months, working since April 2025. And alongside this, I'm also a PhD student at the University of Exeter. So today I'll be sharing the story behind the Isca Photographic Collection, where it began, the remarkable people who shaped it, and why it remains such an important record of Exeter's visual history. So the Isca Photographic Collection is one of Exeter's most significant visual archives. It brings together thousands of negatives, prints, and other photographic materials that document the city's people, places, and transformations across the 20th century. At the heart of this archive is the extraordinary work of Henry Wykes, whose studio and field photography record everything from the devastation of wartime Exeter to the rhythm of everyday life in shops, schools and family homes. We can actually see an example of Henry Wykes' street photography here. So we've got a shot of Exeter High Street from the Guildhall dating to around 1930. So in this talk, we'll explore how the collection came into being, first safeguarded through the dedication of Peter Thomas, and how it's been undergoing a major preservation and digitisation programme that's been led by the South West Heritage Trust, with support from a grant of over £178,000 from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, as well as support from both the Friends of Devon's Archives and the Exeter Canal and Quay Trust. With thousands of acetate negatives affected by vinegar syndrome, a chemical deterioration process that threatens to destroy them, this project has been, in many ways, a race against time to save Exeter's photographic memory. I'll also be taking you behind the scenes of the conservation work, sharing some of the stories emerging from the images and highlighting the community engagement work that is bringing the Isca collection back into public view. From blitz-damaged streets to sewing workshops at St Lloyd's College, the collection offers a powerful and deeply personal glimpse into Exeter's past and reminds us why preserving these photographs is so important for the city's future. To understand the Isca Photographic Collection, we have to begin with the person at its heart, Exonian, historian and lifelong photographer Peter Thomas. And we can see a photograph of Peter Thomas here. So Peter was born here in Exeter in 1948, and like many people of his generation, the city he grew up in was shaped by the long shadow of the Blitz. In the prologue to his book, Old Exeter, Peter reflects on how the bomb-damaged streets became part of his childhood playground, places where he first developed a fascination with the city's past and the stories its streets held. Peter discovered photography at a young age. Encouraged by his godmother, he was gifted his first camera at the age of 11, and that moment sparked a lifelong passion. By the late 1960s, he was working in a photographic shop in Princess Hay, immersing himself in the craft and beginning to collect early photographic equipment. He quickly became known for his deep knowledge of photographic history and even started delivering lectures on the subject. By 1974, Peter had created a small private museum where he worked, a curated space filled with antique cameras and early photographic materials. That same year, Exeter Museum approached him for help with an exhibition on the history of photography. Peter agreed, but he knew something crucial was missing from his own collection: original early photographs of Exeter itself. And that gap, the desire to find the images that told Exeter's visual story, led Peter to a small photography studio in Northern Hay Place, the Henry Wykes studio, and we can see a picture of this on the left. The studio had been running since 1914 and was, at that time, run by Miss Marjorie Hockmuth, seen here on the right, who had taken over after Henry Wykes' death in 1964. When Peter visited, he asked about the studio's negatives, and Marjorie took him into a room lined from floor to ceiling with cardboard boxes, hundreds of them, each filled with half-plate glass negatives, and told him to help himself. It was, in Peter's own words, like stepping into a hidden archive of Exeter's past. Some months later, Marjorie called Peter to say she was closing the studio, and she wondered if he might be willing to take the negatives. He agreed, and he suddenly found himself the custodian of around 42,000 negatives documenting a century of Exeter's life. This was something extraordinary. At that time, in the 1970s, there had been no published photographic history of Exeter, and the images captured by Henry Wykes and his studio showed the city evolving through decades of change. Streets that no longer existed, buildings that had long since been demolished, and the everyday lives of the people who lived here. So recognising how important these images were, not just as photographs, but as records of Exeter's identity, Peter established the Isca Photographic Collection in 1974. His intention was clear: to protect the negatives, to expand the archive, and to ensure that Exeter's visual heritage would be preserved for the future. That dedication shaped the rest of Peter's life. Over the decades, he expanded the collection to include some of the rarest photographs of Exeter, alongside lantern slides, albums, prints, drawings and paintings. He became a prolific local author, produced the first films on historic Exeter and the Blitz, and shared Exeter's stories through lectures, radio, television and the press. In 1985, he joined the City Council as Exeter's first tourism promotion officer, where he created the Redcoat Guided Tours, something that many people still associate with the city today. Peter Thomas sadly passed away in March 2020, but his legacy lives on, not only in his books, his videos, or the city tours he helped establish, but in the Isca Photographic Collection itself. His life's work, a gift to the people of Exeter, is now cared for by the South West Heritage Trust, ensuring that these images continue to be preserved, studied and shared. And so when we look at the Isca Photographic Collection today, we are seeing more than photographs. We are seeing the result of one man's passion, curiosity and a deep love for his city, a legacy that continues to shape how Exeter understands its past. So before we explore the Isca Photographic Collection project, it's important to get to know the person whose work forms its foundation, Henry Wykes. So Henry was born in London in 1874, and even as a child he showed a natural talent for art. His family later moved to Lincolnshire, and while his father pursued a legal career, Henry was already leaning towards a far more creative life. And on this slide we've got some lovely examples of photographs of Henry Wykes. We can see Henry Wykes as a baby on the left, as a young man aged 17 and then aged 30 on the right. At 13, Henry Wykes did something remarkable for someone so young, and he actually went out to sea to work. He spent several years working aboard ships out of Hull, travelling widely and sketching the world around him, and we can start to see here Henry's artistic talents from a young age. So on the left we have his earliest known drawing titled Love, that he did when he was 11, and on the right we have an example of his first painting. After leaving life at sea, he continued to chase opportunities wherever he could find them. He briefly worked in South America, then he later studied art in Antwerp. He had no formal training, but he spent hours copying old masters and absorbing as much as he could. By his early 20s, Henry was producing confident painterly work. One of his early oil paintings, entitled Salome, was so important to him that when he later opened his first photographic studio in Exeter, he hung it in pride of place in the reception room. And we can see this painting here. Back in England, Henry met and married Blanche Winship, and together they built a long life spanning 54 years and 2 children. For a short period, the family tried emigrating to Australia. Henry found work and began experimenting with photography there, but Blanche found it difficult, and in a story that says a lot about her determination, earned their fair home by taking in laundry and students. That Australian chapter didn't last long, but it gave Henry something lasting, a new fascination with photography. And we can see 2 examples of family portraits that Henry took whilst he was living in Australia. So the top photograph is the Wykes family exploring, dated to around 1912, and then the bottom shows the Wykes family home in Australia. After returning to England, the Wykes family eventually moved south to Exeter, settling first in Topsham. Henry soon spotted an opportunity in the city, an empty photographic studio at No. 1 Exbridge. If we look carefully at the interior photograph of the Exbridge studio on the left, we can see just there on the mantelpiece the portrait of Salome. And on the right here, we've got a lovely example of the Wykes family taken in that studio in 1914. What's brilliant about the Henry Wykes archive is he was a prolific photographer of not only Exeter but his own family, and he took a lot of self-portraits and also studio portraits of close relationships to him. So here we have a lovely self-portrait of him on the left, and then a studio portrait of Blanche, his wife. So in 1914, he opened the studio and he advertised himself as both photographer and artist. From the beginning, the studio blended photography, portrait painting, picture restoration and hand tinting, all areas where Henry's artistic eye made a huge difference. And on this slide, we can see some examples of hand tinting, drawing and toning. Again, we've got some fantastic examples here of hand tinting, drawing and toning by Henry Wykes, and these are two portraits that he was commissioned to take. During the First World War, the studio gained a reputation for taking portrait photographs of soldiers, images that families treasured when loved ones left for the front. Then, in March 1917, an extraordinary event changed the course of Henry's career. A tram lost control on the hill above Exbridge and overturned, killing a passenger. Henry grabbed his camera, loaded glass plates, and recorded the aftermath within minutes. He processed the images so quickly that he was selling postcard prints to onlookers within the hour. Those photographs are now some of the rarest surviving images of Exeter before the war. And on the screen here, we've got one of these images that Henry Wykes took. And I've circled in red where we can actually see his studio sign. So this is where Henry Wykes' studio was, No. 1 Exbridge, and how close it was to the action. So that's why he could get on the scene so quickly. As his skill and reputation spread through the city, Henry was commissioned by prominent families and even photographed the Duke and Duchess of York during a private visit to Devon to the Clinton estate, and we can see these photographs here. These commissions elevated the studio's status and gave Henry access to some of the most influential circles in the region. By the late 1920s, Henry relocated to a more prestigious premise in Bedford Circus, while keeping the original studio running under a trusted colleague. Unfortunately, much of his earliest archive seems to have disappeared during that move, a reminder of how fragile photographic history can be. We've got this wonderful example here of an aerial view of Exeter before the Second World War. And we can see the cathedral here in the foreground and Bedford Circus in the background. This was actually destroyed as a result of the Blitz and also the council demolition that took place afterwards. It would have been a beautiful oval street, much like the ones that we can see in Bath, and this is where Henry Wykes' studio was. It's now the site of Princess Hay. This is another fantastic example of Bedford Circus, another one that Henry Wykes took, and we can see that lovely curvature in the architecture and some beautiful examples of the cars on the road as well. This image is just a zoomed in close-up of the one that we've seen, and we can see here Henry Wykes' studio sign that's just jutting out in the shape of a traditional artist's palette. And we can now see the interior of his Bedford Circus studio from around 1920s to 1930s. And the studio was designed to resemble a comfortable sitting room rather than having a formal backdrop. In 1939, he moved again, this time to Northern Hay Place. That decision turned out to be incredibly fortunate. Just 3 years later, the Baedeker air raids devastated Bedford Circus. Had Henry not moved the negatives out when he did, the entire archive could have been destroyed. The Northern Hay studio was an impressive operation. Beneath the ground floor reception rooms was a large portrait studio fitted out like a sitting room, complete with a false window. We can see that on the left, and it's reminiscent of his Bedford Circus room. The studio kept meticulous records, dates, names, negative numbers, print sizes, prices. A few of the old account books still survive today, giving us rich insight into the people of Exeter who passed through Henry's doors. So we can see an example of a page of a ledger here as well. And then he also had a viewing room where clients could come and see examples of the portraits he had taken. Henry used a magnificent mahogany and brass camera, an instrument designed for precision, fitted to produce half-plate images. Thousands of portraits were taken with this camera. So we've got some photographs here of his camera, and we can see just how big it was. This image on the right here, we've got a mannequin standing next to it, but it does give us an idea of just how large that camera really was. Henry continued to explore new creative avenues. In the 1920s, he became an associate of the Royal Society of Miniature Painters. There's evidence that Henry sent the Queen Mother a miniature portrait in 1962, which she did have to politely decline as the royal family didn't accept gifts from private people unless they were well known to them. He also developed a passion for aerial photography, flying over Devon well into his 80s, thanks to a son-in-law who took him up until 1954. At the time, he was believed to be the oldest practicing aerial photographer in the country, and we have some really exceptional examples of his aerial photography in the collection. On the left here, this is pre-Second World War, and we can see Bedford Circus again, that circle of buildings, the cathedral, as well as much of the landscape of Exeter before it was fundamentally changed by the Blitz. On the right, we can see an image taken over the quay, and right at the centre is Custom House. You can see Custom House and then those sheds coming down, and not a lot of that landscape has changed. Here we have a fantastic example of a view of Exeter High Street. This photograph shows the last electric tram in service, Exeter, 19th of August 1931. And what I love about this image is how much movement's in it. You can almost take yourself back there and hear all of the bells on the bikes, the sounds of the engine, and people walking along the street. I think it's a really dynamic photograph. In this photograph, which was a Henry Wykes commission, we've got a society wedding at the cathedral in 1929. The bride, Miss Eve Cecil, was the daughter of the Bishop of Exeter, and she married Commander Richard Shelley in a grand ceremony attended by 1,400 guests. I think this image is really evocative of some of the pre-Raphaelite art, and the way that the photograph is composed and the tones within it are really rich. Here we have another photograph dating around the 1930s, and it's a publicity stunt at the Theatre Royal. So in the centre of the frame we've got a visiting actress, and she's posing outside the Theatre Royal in a car to promote a new fleet of Vauxhalls. This photograph again is dated to around the 1930s, and it's showing Holman, Ham and Co Limited dispensing chemists. Here we have one of my favourite photographs from the collection, when the circus elephants are posing outside of the Odeon Cinema in 1939. 6 elephants from Bertram Mills Circus have assembled outside the Odeon, and they're featuring 14-year-old Joyce King, who's the young girl in the centre of the frame. And we've actually got a blog post up around the elephants and the Isca Photographic Collection if anyone would like to read more about it. In this photograph we can see St Loyd's College workshop dating to around the 1950s. In the early hours of the 4th of May 1942, under a clear sky and full moon, German bombers followed the line of the ex-estuary inland and headed straight for Exeter's historic heart. The city was hit extensively, with devastating consequences for both its people and its heritage. And in this photograph, we can see what happened to Bedford Circus. That lovely circular ring of buildings has been totally destroyed. Unfortunately, Henry moved his studio a few years before this happened. This attack was part of what became known as the Baedeker Raids, a series of retaliatory strikes ordered by Hitler. They were named after the Baedeker travel guides, which listed culturally significant cities rather than military targets. Exeter was chosen in response to the British bombing of Lubeck in March 1941, a city of similar size and medieval character, where narrow streets and timber-framed buildings had made it especially vulnerable to firebombing. And in this photograph we can see bombed out Martin's Bank on Bedford Street. The aim of the Luftwaffe was not only physical destruction but cultural demoralisation. Exeter's ancient buildings, homes and communities were caught in the middle of this ideological conflict. And yet, the city endured, and its recovery stands as a powerful example of resilience in the face of targeted cultural devastation. This is one of my favourite photographs taken shortly after the Blitz, when the damage was starting to be cleared away, and we can see here people getting on with their day even amongst such incredible devastation. Henry Wykes died in 1964 at the age of 90, having spent half a century photographing Exeter and its people. He left behind thousands of negatives and prints, portraits, street scenes, wartime devastation, joyful family groups, vanished buildings, and the everyday life of the city across decades of change. Those images, rescued, preserved, and eventually brought together through the Isca Photographic Collection, now form one of the most important visual records of Exeter in the 20th century. So now that we've explored the life and work of Henry Wykes and understand the pivotal role that Peter Thomas had in creating this collection, I'd like to shift our focus to the present day and talk about the work the South West Heritage Trust is doing to save the Isca Photographic Collection, made possible through support from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. After the South West Heritage Trust acquired the Isca Photographic Collection in 2022, we knew we were taking responsibility for a vast and fragile archive. The collection brings together a huge range of materials, the core being the work of Henry Wykes, but Peter Thomas added many other important archives too. So today the collection includes glass plate negatives, deteriorating acetate negatives, photographic prints, slides, albums, and much more. And we can see here on the screen some examples of how the collection came into South West Heritage Trust. And these are the boxes that contained the acetate negatives. Again, these are some photographs showing how the collection came to the South West Heritage Trust, largely in the cardboard boxes as they can be seen on the left. So priority during the initial few weeks was to appraise, sort and repackage material into appropriate archive grade storage, and we can see that on the right. Here is an example of just some of the many photographic prints. This is a photograph I took one day when I was sorting through and theming some of the material that we have. Because of the scale and complexity of the Isca Photographic Collection, we applied to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for support to help us rescue and preserve the collection, and importantly to make it accessible for everyone in Exeter. We were awarded a grant of over £178,000, which has allowed us to carry out the work that would otherwise have been impossible. When the National Lottery Heritage Fund funds a project, they agree a set of approved purposes, and these are essentially the core promises we make about what the project will achieve. And they have guided every decision we've made and form the framework of the entire project. So when we started the project, our approved purposes were, firstly, to digitise all of the fragile acetate negatives affected by vinegar syndrome, to recruit volunteers, to develop reminiscence sessions in care homes, to deliver a public talk on Henry Wykes, the collection and the preservation work, to create exhibitions, to run schools and community workshops, to recruit a dedicated project officer, and to finally evaluate the project. All of these approved purposes have made up the backbone of the project, and they are what we have needed to complete, and they are now all complete as of April 2026. So I've repeatedly mentioned vinegar syndrome, but what actually is it? So we were aware that the acetate negatives in the collection were suffering from vinegar syndrome, and this is a chemical form of deterioration that affects acetate photographic film. As the film's base begins to break down, it releases acetic acid, that same acid that gives vinegar its sharp smell. This chemical reaction causes the negatives to warp, curl, shrink, and become brittle. The image itself can become fogged or distorted, and eventually the photograph is lost altogether. Once vinegar syndrome begins, it cannot be reversed, and the material is literally on the clock. It's a little-known problem outside of archives, but within collections care, it's one of the most urgent and feared forms of photographic decay. And on this slide, we can see an acetate negative that's really suffering with vinegar syndrome, one of the latest stages. We can see how it's bubbled and warped and distorted. In March 2024, our senior conservator carried out a detailed condition survey of the Isca Photographic Collection, and what she discovered was deeply concerning. An estimated 24,000 acetate negatives, many taken by Henry Wykes and showing weddings, christenings and studio portraits, were affected by vinegar syndrome, and the deterioration was accelerating. Because of their condition, these negatives couldn't be safely handled by either the public or researchers. Prolonged exposure to the acetic acid they release can be harmful to health, and the film itself had become so brittle that even careful handling risked permanent damage to the image. I've included this photograph here of some of my colleagues when the negatives were first being assessed. What you can't see is them recoiling from the very pungent vinegar smell. Thanks to the funding we received, we were able to partner with a specialist digitisation company to preserve these photographs digitally. This work is saving the images before they're lost forever, safeguarding Henry Wykes' legacy and opening up the Isca collection so it can once again be accessed and enjoyed. We were also surprised and slightly alarmed to discover that what we initially estimated to be 24,000 acetate negatives turned out to be nearly 40,000. The discrepancy was due to multiple negatives being stored within individual boxes, revealing just how extensive and how vulnerable this part of the collection really is. So on this slide, what we've been able to show is some of the digitised images that have come from the negatives with vinegar syndrome. So on the left, we have a negative with vinegar syndrome, and then the two photographs are showing the positive images that have come from a negative with various stages of the decay. to the first image, it's very obvious to see how the vinegar syndrome has affected the photograph. We can see some of that channeling and that bubbling and warping, but the image is still legible. Thankfully, in the bottom image, we've got a really wonderful photograph of the university rugby team, and the vinegar syndrome hasn't damaged the image very badly at all. As well as the acetate negatives, we also have glass plate negatives, and the approximate 3,000 glass plate negatives have now been fully cleaned, repackaged under the supervision of our senior conservator, which has been a vital step in ensuring their long-term preservation. This work was carried out by Lindsay, Anne, Jess and Anne-Marie, our 4 conservation volunteers. Their care, skill and commitment have been absolutely invaluable to the project. Handling fragile glass plates is meticulous and demanding work, and their dedication has played a crucial role in safeguarding this part of the Isca collection for future generations. On this slide, we can see some more of the volunteer work going on. So on the left, Lindsay is cleaning and repackaging some glass plates, and on the right there we can see Jess. Alongside this conservation work, our digitisation volunteer, Sandy, has also made a significant contribution. Over the course of well over 100 volunteer hours, she has successfully digitised over 2,000 glass plate negatives, an important milestone in safeguarding this unique heritage material and making it accessible for the future. And as part of the project's community outreach programme, we've partnered with Reminiscence Learning in October to deliver 3 90-minute reminiscence sessions at Watermeadow Grange Care Home in Topsham. A reminiscence session is a therapeutic activity designed to stimulate long-term memories through conversation and sensory engagement. Each session was carefully designed to build trust, stimulate memory and encourage participants to share personal stories connected to Exeter's past. On the South West Heritage Trust YouTube channel, you'll be able to access the full project film as well as a breakdown films of the reminiscence sessions and the other community engagement work. We've also been able to hold 2 mini exhibitions of the Isca Photographic Collection that were held at the Custom House in Exeter during February and March 2026. The first exhibition was titled The Living Archive of Exeter's Waterfront, and it explored Exeter's historic relationship with the River Exe and its waterfront, a place that has long been central to trade, transport and everyday community life. Visitors encountered images of remarkable engineering feats that shaped the city's bridges, scenes from bustling working quayside, and moments of dramatic historical significance. Running alongside this was our second exhibition, Exeter Through the Lens, and this exhibition presented Exeter through a changing photographic eye, from elegant society portraits and evolving streetscapes to rare and compelling images of the Baedeker raids of 1942. It also documented periods of intense urban transformation during the 1920s and 1930s, revealing how the city adapted and endured. Together, these images form a vivid chronicle of Exeter's identity, capturing its triumphs, tragedies and enduring spirit. Both exhibitions ran concurrently at the Custom House and also included screenings of our project films, which tell the story of saving the Isca collection and highlight the extensive community engagement work that has taken place throughout the project. We've also had a 7-week run at the Devon Exeter Institution, where half of our display panels were installed in the institution's outer library. And we are also hoping to very shortly have a permanent digital exhibition on the South West Heritage Trust website. This will ensure the project reaches a wider audience and provides lasting access to the stories, images and community voices at the heart of the Isca collection. Perhaps the most important part of the Isca project is ensuring that the collection is accessible both now and in the future. Currently, the high-resolution digitised images are being ingested into our catalogue, providing secure, long-term digital preservation and ensuring that these images are protected for generations to come. This process also allows the collection to be properly managed, described and safely stored within a trusted digital preservation system. Crucially, this work doesn't just end with preservation. The digitised images will then be made readily accessible to the researchers and the public who access the Devon Heritage Centre, but also anyone accessing the catalogue on the website. In this way, the Isca Collection moves beyond storage and safeguarding, becoming an active and usable resource for researchers, students and the wider community. So, to bring us to the end of today's talk, what we've seen is that the Isca Photographic Collection is far more than a collection of old photographs. It is a living record of Exeter, shaped by the vision of Henry Wykes, safeguarded through the dedication of Peter Thomas, and now being actively preserved, rediscovered and shared through the work of the South West Heritage Trust. From fragile glass plates and deteriorating acetate negatives to high-resolution digital images, community workshops, reminiscence sessions, school projects, exhibitions, films, and a permanent digital presence, this project is about ensuring that Exeter's photographic heritage is not only saved, but used, seen and felt. It's about access, making sure these images are available to researchers, students, families, and anyone with an interest in the city's past. And it's about connection between generations, between memory and place, and between the people of Exeter and their shared history. As the project moves towards completion in 2026, the Isca Photographic Collection will continue to grow as a public resource, one that belongs in conversations, classrooms, exhibitions and community spaces across the city. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and for listening to the story of the Isca Photographic Collection. If you'd like more information on the Isca Photographic Collection, we have 3 films up on the South West Heritage Trust YouTube page. This is a longer 20-minute film, and also we have specialist films that look at the printmaking work that we did with Daisy, the performance work and also the reminiscence sessions. We've also got a blog page that you can access through the South West Heritage Trust website, and you can read up more about the Isca Photographic project there. Thank you so much for your time.